So we're back in Senate Judiciary just to do a bit of committee discussion after hearing some introductions and general overview of priorities from the administration and relatively informal discussion. So thoughts, takeaways initially from the committee as to what direction we should head in.
I'll start. And I'd like to bring up the point of how we use data. Okay, and I'm probably guilty of it as the next individual citizen here is. I think that we need to come to an agreement as to we're going to use data percentage-wise, or we're going to use hard numbers, or we're going to have both of them in there so that, I mean, I've used percentages also in the past when it seemed to be toward my favor to do just this. And I want to make sure that all of the information that's available, whether it's data or hard numbers, is available for all of us so that we can actually see. I'm not a big on percentages. I like, but the senator was asking this morning, I like hard figures. Okay. But then we swing back to data. And in reference to there's going to be a long, there's going to be a lot of conversations as to what was presented this morning. Is a very minimal time period that he had here. Well, what I'll tell you is that what I heard from my constituents throughout Franklin County, even outside of Franklin County, was, I brought this up in the past, is they are under the impression that we're suffering. That's what I'm hearing from the voters. Okay, so what we have been doing, according to them, and I agree with a lot of it, is hasn't been working. And we can look at any particular areas, whether it's from defunding the police to bail reform to whatever else. Some people refer to it as a catch and release system, or whatever that may be here. And I think that they spoke loudly. So I think that we need to address these things. We need to come up with those necessary compromises so that we feel good when we leave here as a group versus our own personal business that we do what we don't have here. So that's the direction I'd like to see us going, without even mentioning particular bills. I think that we need to work as a team here at the White House.
So we're just having a informal discussion, debrief about everything we just heard, and putting some ideas out there about how to proceed. And
I'll just join in. I second much of what Bob said. I hear from my constituents that they believe, and where do beliefs come from? You know, is it news reports that chase sensational stories, or is it actual data? Is it actual experience? But many people in Burlington believe that Burlington has become unsafe. Go downtown. I've heard similar things from Rutland and Bennington, and crime is up. So it's I don't think it's without. Tucker gave us some numbers. So I don't think it's without merit. But what I would say is people have a kind of magical belief that we're going to be able to pass a law that, for instance, will get rid of retail theft. So what I've tried to say to merchants in particular on Church Street is we can look at a new penalty scheme, which we put into place last year. And I said, but I don't think that will solve your problem, because addiction is driving much of it. So you have people who are not rational. They're in the throes of addiction, often homeless. And so, the idea that there's an increased penalty down the road that might take 3 years to work out in court or 4 years to work out in court, not sure that's going to help. We also have national trends, spikes in homelessness, and inflation and other things driving this. So I think we need to always be looking at what can we do that will have an impact, and do our best to find compromise to get there. But it's always a murky thing trying to figure out whether people's beliefs are tracking with actual facts on the ground, so that we don't make things worse or just pass laws to make people feel good or make ourselves.
Thank you. And if I might just add on to that in case you missed it, one of my requests prior to coming in here was that we either have access to both numbers, percentages and hard numbers, or we use one or the other. I don't believe in the percentages. I like to see hard numbers like I brought up this morning. You know, you get a homicide this week and next year you get another one, you get two, homicides went up 100%. I like hard numbers. I don't know what the committee thinks about that, but I just.
Oh, I agree. And so Senator Bihowski asking for the real number in each case as opposed to the percentage was useful. I was going to point out, I wrote a book about Pat Leahy. He was state's attorney at one point, and he happened to be state's attorney for an 8-year period where this huge run up in homicides, but huge run up compared to what it had been. So in the 50s in Chittenden County, there was one homicide for the decade in Chittenden County. Then you get to the mid 60s, it explodes and there are 6. And then it goes up eventually to the point where there are 30, I think it's 32 in 1 year. So there is a run up in homicide, but it's compared to the fact that there was almost 0 for the decade of the 50s. So yeah, hard numbers for sure, where we can get them.
Yeah, I think your point about the penalties is well taken. You know, I mean, off the top of my head, I believe, you know, for example, burglary into an occupied dwelling has a maximum penalty of 20 years. You know, I don't think that if we were to bump it to 25 years, somebody who is contemplating burglarizing a home is going to make different life choices. I mean, they know that if I burglarize this home, it's going to be a felony. May not know the exact number, but you're not going to say that, oh, 25 years, that's too much, but I was fine with 20 as a, you know, potential maximum. So that's one thought. But
Yeah.
So Senator Meadows.
Yeah, you know, just kind of along the same lines as Bob talking about the data. I think it is, you kind of need to know both percentages and the raw data, because like Phil just said, you know, you go from 1 to 6, it's quite a percentage increase, but you know, you're going up like 5, and it kind of depends on what the crime is too, the severity of it, and also kind of how it tracks with our population. So if we go from, you know, 1,000 people breaking into cars at some point where our population was lower, I'd imagine it will increase anyway per capita as we start to go up. But for me, you know, just out on the campaign trail about Burlington and feeling safe and whatnot, I recently was speaking. Whenever I talk to law enforcement, I always try to ask them, you know, how are things out there? Are you seeing any trends going up, down, whatever? And I'm, you know, never been in the judiciary world, so I'm one of those people that get my information from the news and just talking to other people. So it's going to be interesting to look at the actual numbers of things that are going on out there versus just what you hear in the news, whether it's a press release or a news story or something like that. So I don't have any direction. I'm kind of just going with the tide, figuring out everything that's going on in here. So that's kind of my direction that I'm going to go at this with a clear lens on trying to figure out what the numbers are and what's happening in Vermont, because we're, you know, my district's right on the outskirts of Burlington. So I hear it all the time about, you know, I don't have any use for going to Burlington, this and that, and that's our closest city. It has a lot of resources. So it's too bad that people don't feel safe going down to the largest city in Vermont. So looking forward to digging deeper into the information.
Awesome.
I agree with Bob that we need a full picture of the data, both the Vermont data and how that compares to the national data. We don't exist in a vacuum. And I think it's also really important that we take our responsibility as people in leadership who can set the narrative to steer away from false rhetoric and false messaging. You know, Burlington did not defund the police. It is still the 4th safest city in the nation. And so I think that we have an obligation in the position that we're in to make sure we are informed and we are not blaming the fans of rhetoric. And I think we also really need to think about outside the box, you know, in terms of responses, even of what we're doing as a nation. You know, the whole nation is seeing increasing crime. And if incarcerating people was going to make us safer, we'd be one of the safest nations in the world. We are in the top 5 every year for per capita rate of incarceration, yet we are every year in the bottom third for safety. And so I think we need to also think outside the box in new ways about what's actually going to work and not going backwards to things we know do not work. You know, we know from 50 years of Department of Justice data that increased penalties don't decrease crime. And so I think we also really need to be thinking about prevention and need to be thinking outside of the box of what we have always done, because I think all of us would agree that is not working.
Thank you. Yeah, so, you know, we will be getting a number of bills. I found out that several of the bills that I submitted regarding some of these topics got tied up in operations. And I imagine there was a flurry of bills, but we'll be getting those on tomorrow, I believe. We also just got the governor's omnibus bill, which is dense. So obviously we don't have to read that right now.
Good
but-
nighttime reading.
Yeah, good nighttime reading, and then we can come back and I imagine we'll get a more clear walkthrough. My hope is that, you know, we would have that today, but you know, that's fine. We can have that another time. You know, it is my hope to address sealing and expungement. And we'll also be having a joint hearing in the near future about the backlog. And also looking at 7575, which is the revocation of the right to bail. I mean, there's constitutional guardrails in place regarding what we can and can't do. So we will be getting another walkthrough from, I almost call them Senator, Ledge Counsel, Ben Novogroski, to talk about,
Should be a second.
you know, to talk about bail in general and just give us all a refresher. And, you know, once we have that information, then we can proceed regarding conditions of release. But I mean, you know, similar to, you know, to echo what I think has been said already, you know, the last 6 months to a year or so, and one of the number one issues about public safety is the repeat offenses. And why is somebody getting a citation for smashing a window and then they walk away and then they smash another window the next day? You know, why are they still out? And that is a very, very valid question that we should answer. And there's also the work that we have to do regarding, you know, how we are keeping people safe and also how we are ensuring people follow their conditions of release. I can't remember which justice it was. I think I mentioned it earlier that said that our conditions of release are essentially a paper tiger, meaning that there's no teeth to it. And, you know, that was something that we had hoped to address regarding with the pretrial supervision program. So it sounds like we'll be getting some information about how that has been implemented and how it's working.
Doesn't sound like it has been implemented.
I think it just started, right?
Yeah.
I just don't know what data we're gonna
Next
get.
year they'll come in with
Right.
preliminary
Okay. Oh, yeah, I guess I misunderstood.
on the pretrial bond.
Okay.
Because I also want to be careful that we're not like getting out ahead over our skis in
Yeah.
terms of like responding to things that we haven't even
Right.
allowed to work.
Right.
I must have misheard of that. For some reason, I thought they were going to be coming in with a report about how it's starting off, but I must have misunderstood. So, all right. Increasing treatment access, agree 100%. I know there's we'll be hearing from DOC soon. I have concerns. There are some issues regarding detainees not getting access to treatment. And, you know, person who goes in for 3 days or 2 weeks and they're, you know, in terms of recovery, they're on Suboxone or methadone. And in some circumstances, not getting access to that and then being released back out. Having that happen can be pretty disruptive for somebody who is not actually using illicit drugs and is actually in recovery. So hopefully that's something we can address.
We addressed that joint legislative oversight. The Medicaid problem, the Medicare problem, where it's 30 days that word, they are now.
Sentence individuals.
Yeah.
Just sentenced individuals, okay.
So,
All right.
I want to definitely make sure we're addressing treatment within our system, but I also want to be making sure that part of that conversation is actually addressing treatment outside of the system. I really think our criminal justice system is very ill equipped to handle the trauma and when someone is incarcerated, they should have access to treatment if possible. I think community treatment has been shown to be more effective, especially in overdose deaths. We know that when people are released from incarceration, their risk of overdosing increases some ridiculous percentage, 100 or 200%. I don't know necessarily what the hard number is, or even if it's possible to get a hard number on that. So I want to be having sort of a holistic conversation about treatment, both treatment for people who are incarcerated, but also treatment as alternative to incarceration and prevention to incarceration.
I do agree with that. I think though that it's, when it comes to treatment in general, I'm just thinking about our jurisdiction as the Judiciary Committee because, there is the question that we're answering are when somebody is justice involved or they've been charged, they've been convicted, or they're on probation, how are we addressing those issues? But treatment in general, without any involvement of the judiciary, I think that's something that would fall into our next door neighbor's jurisdiction. But
And this is why I suggested a joint hearing, because I think all too often part of the reason we end up sort of circling around the same solutions is because we operate in silos.
Yeah.
And we're not actually having a conversation about how that preventive treatment prevents incarceration and decreases our tax expenditures because we're no longer spending $100,000 to incarcerate someone. I think all too frequently we look at what's immediately in front of us within our own silo without looking at the long-term impacts on human life and cost and the ways in which the silo is not functioning. So that is part of why I suggested we do some joint hearings to start to bridge those gaps.
sounds good. Any additional closing remarks?
Well, to your point earlier about what happens to that data point when something's sealed or expunged, can we get a firm answer on exactly what does happen to that? Because I don't know how often it happens.
Am I remembering wrong? I thought in the expungement statute, there was an exception for data gathering. That was.
Yep.
That's right. So I think that has been given some thought in what we passed into law so that I think it's CRG that collects the data.
Okay.
And they have access to, the aggregate data, not people's identities. I think, but it's a good point because otherwise it would skew all of our thinking.
It would certainly be the safest country if all the records are being deleted.
I don't know if that's
Move forward.
I know, I'm being slightly facetious.
I was gonna say, we can certainly we can decrease crime by making fewer crimes.
All right, thank you, everybody. Tomorrow we have judge confirmations and at 9 o'clock, so.